Alright, Daf Kuf Chaf. And yesterday we were discussing the Machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, whether or not a nima, a hair, can be considered a yad. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it could be. And Rabbi Yochanan asked in Reish Lakish from the Mishnah that's coming up in a couple blot about this piece of oira that has a kezayis basar, that had a gibet tzivayetz mimenu, and ubesayru shekenegdai, and that little strand of hair is going to be metama. And doesn't that seem to say that a piece of hair can be a yad? To which Reish Lakish says, no, it's a shomer. It's a shomer al gabe shomer. And the Gemara had said, it's chalchuche mechalchel. So we asked, how can you use it for tefillin? It's not a ksiva tama if there's little holes. And the Gemara says, don't worry about it because kol nekev shediyai over alav ein nekev, if the ink does not go through the hole, so such a small hole is not significant enough to make it not a ksiva tama. And now we're picking it up on the sixth wide line on Kuf Yutesam Beis for a second teretz. V'boy yesema, I'll tell you another teretz why it's not shver from the Mishnah on the Cyrus on this, or because kula mishum yad, it taka is a yad, it's not a shomer. But you know why it's going to work out yad? It's because of kida omer Rabbi Loi, b'malai shebein hamiloim. It's not a single hair; it's a group of hairs. They're strength in numbers. So hachinami benima shebein hanimin. A single hair and a chanami would not be a yad, but a group of hairs or a single hair that's meant to be used as part of a group of hairs, that would be considered a yad. Vehecha itmar to Rabbi Loi, and this idea, where was it actually said? So the Gemara, on that Mishnah in the first parak of Uktzin, milai shebishiyut bolim. These are the little bristles at the top of a ear of grain. They are mitamin umitamin ve'im mitzdarfin. They can receive the tuma and they can put out tuma, but they can't be mitzdarf for the shear of tuma seichlin. And the reason is because each one of these little bristles on top of this ear of grain is a yad, but not a shomer. The question is going to be malai lamai chosi. A single bristle on top of one of these ears of grain, it's for sure going to fall off if you grab it, because Omer Rabbi Loi, b'malai shebein hamiloyim. It's one of many. When you grab it as a group in a chanami, it will be a proper yad. Now we're going to have a couple other lashonos, which are essentially the same conversation, just with small varying details about who said what, but the points will mamish be the same. Lishnachrina amrila, that this is what Rabbi Yochanan had asked on Reish Lakish. That when Rabbi Yochanan asked on Reish Lakish from the Mishnah about this nima, Reish Lakish says it's a shomer, not a yad. And now continuing that conversation, hachinami mistaber mishum shomer and not a yad. Disal kedaitach mishum yad nima achas lamai chazi. How could that be? A single hair can never be a yad. It's going to rip off. Kedom Rabbi Eloi, b'malai shebein hamiloyim. So hachinami benima shebein animin. It's one of many. Vehecha idmar to Rabbi Eloi, and what was the context of Rabbi Eloi was originally talking about? Ahad, it's not like that Mishnah. Hamaloi shebishibolim mitamin umitamin ve'ein mitzdarfin and malai lamai chazi. It's going to rip off. Rabbi Eloi, b'malai shebein hamiloyim. That was the context that Rabbi Eloi said as halacha. V'yikidabasi lo, and there's yet another version of this machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in their conversation. Moving over to Tamid Aleph, Amas Nisan, Ha'arba, Reitev Akipa, etc. Mitzdarfin l'tamei tumas oichlin. Omer Reish Lakish on the Mishnah, Lo shanu ela etzem. They're talking l'sagabe a bone to have a shomer, because of the bone is a shomer for the marrow that's inside of it. It's not a yad because there wouldn't be enough of the shear to make the yad. But Zakt Reish Lakish aval nima le have a shomer. A hair is not a shomer, and therefore you're not going to have the shear. And as Rashi points out, it's not going to be mitzdarf because ein shomer al gabe shomer. A hair on top of the meat is a shomer al gabe shomer. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, no, afilu nima nami have a shomer. Every individual hair is also considered a shomer. Omer le Reish Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan umi kashomer al gabe shomer. How can that work? You can't have a shomer al gabe shomer. Teretz is so Rabbi Yochanan chalchule mechalchal. It goes all the way through, so it's not a shomer al gabe shomer. It goes all the way down through the R into the basar. Maskel v'ravacha el me'at tefillin echi kasvin. Same kasha. How do you ever write tefillin? I'll be in ksiva tama v'lek. You have this quite literally holy parchment now, and therefore it's not a ksiva tama. And for the Gemara, hishta mitzeh hada amri b'ma'arava kol nekev shadiyei over alav einay nekev. The hole is small enough that it doesn't pose a problem. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish from the Mishnah coming up on Kuf Chav Daled. Or sheyesh alav k'zayis basar hanegeh b'tziva yetzmiyona, that piece of meat that's sticking out. Or ubisara shekenegdai is going to be tamei. My lab mishum shomer. So you see that a single hair is considered a shomer. And for the Gemara, loy mishum yad. So nima achas l'may chazia kedam Rabbi Loi b'malei shebein hamiloyim. It's one of many. Achinami b'nima shebein hamanimin. And where was the mucker that Rabbi Loi said this? Vehecha idmar Rabbi Loi. Ahad etnan hamalai shebishibolin mitamin umitamin ve'ena mitzdarfin. And malai lamai chazia. What could a single bristle do? It's going to fall off right away. Amar Rabbi Loi b'malai shebein hamiloyim. It's one of many, and therefore you can lift up that ear of grain by grabbing all of them. Therefore, every individual one will also be nechshav a yad. So like I said, it's exactly the same Gemara. It's just who said what and what was the context, but they're all the same Yesaitis. Then the Mishnah said v'haraitev, that even the gravy is going to be mitzdaref for the shear of tumas eichlin. So my raitev, what is it? So marava shumna, it's the fat. So only abai if it's the fat. Who atmi tamei tumas eichlin? If it's edible, so then it is eichlin. Why does the Mishnah have to say that it's mitzdaref to make it into tumas eichlin? It's got to be something that's inedible. Ella chaylev dekarish. It must have been already congealed. It's not the regular chaylev. It's this congealed stuff which could be eaten with the meat, but it's a different product. So mayur yakarish. Why do we have to say it's congealed? The point is it's something that's not the edible part. Kila karish nami. Even if it is not congealed, if you're telling me that this thing is mitzdaref, the Omer Reish Lakish tzir shal gabe yarak, the tzir touches the sap that comes out of the yarak, the vegetables, mitzdaref l'kakai sevis b'yom kippurim. So if the liquid version of this tzir is considered an eichel when it's on the yarak, the chaylev dekarish should also also be considered food if it's sitting on top of the basar. But there's a chiluk between this halacha and the halacha of Yom Kippur, because also mishum yisuvei daitehu. The whole isser of Yom Kippur is an issue of not being b'yisuvei daite. Just to refresh our memories, there is no isser to eat on Yom Kippur, but rather there's a mitzvah saseh to be ma'ana yourself. That's why the shiurim for Yom Kippur are different. It's a kakeseves, not a kazayas. So here, if you are achieving a yisuvei daite because you've now consumed something, that will make it usser. And therefore the Gemara says, b'koldu miyasv daite. Even the smallest amount will be miyasv your daite. But hacham mishum etzterufehu, but l'gabe hilchos tuma, you need to have a certain shear of size based on tziruf. So eat karish mitzdarif, you like karish le mitzdarif. It depends on whether it's congealed as a solid to allow for the tziruf. And the way the Rashash understands this is because kol zman it's a liquid, it's considered a mashke and not a neichel, therefore it won't be mitzdarif. Then the Mishnah had said vakipa, which is something that settles at the bottom of the pot. So my kipa, amarabba, pirma, it's the dregs at the bottom of the pot. That is going to be mitzdarif for the share of tumas eichlin. Amarle abaya, same kashav, who atzmi yatama tumas eichlin. If it's food, why are you coming on to tziruf? It itself is going to be matama tumas eichlin. So it can't be that it's the actual dregs of real meat. Ela omar rapapa tavlin. It must be the spices that remained in the pot, and spices are never eaten by themselves, so they wouldn't have their own tumas eichlin. But that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. They will be mitzdarif in such a situation. Okay, so now for the rest of today's daf, we're going to talk about liquefying solids and solidifying liquids, and we get to bounce around shas to do it. Tanan hasam, and this is going to be a reference to a brisa and not a Mishnah. Hikpa es hadam v'achalei. Let's say you cooked the dam such that now it became a solid, and then you ate it. Oy shehimches hachelev v'gamay, or you liquefied the chelev and drank it. So the halacha is you're still going to be chayiv. You get your iser karis, and if you do b'shogeg, you'll have to bring the korban chatas. Now bishlam hikves hadam v'achalei. If you solidify the blood and you ate it, I get it, because even though it's changed, because kiven de akpe achshuve achshave. There's this far of achshave. Now that you took the time to actually solidify and do something, you made it chashiv in this new matzah, and therefore you're going to be chayiv for eating the solid blood. Elahimches chelev v'gamay. But let's say I dissolve the chelev and now I drink it. Achil ksibe. The Torah says you got to eat it. V'hol avachilahi. And this is not called eating. And for the Gemara, Amar Reish Lakish, Amar Kra nefesh. By chelev, the Torah says nefesh, as in v'nichrasa hanefesh, as it says in the pasuk, which we darshan l'rabbi says hashaisa. So it's a special gzeras ha'kosev. Now Taisus over here asks, why are we using a pasuk to tell me that shaisa is also b'chlal achila? We know the shtia is b'chlal achila. Whenever the Torah says don't eat, we know you can't drink. And Taisus says an important teretz for this Gemara that you're right. By a mili de shtia like yayin and shemen, when the Torah says don't eat it, it means not to drink it. But by something that's a bar achila that you melted and you drink it, that's when we're going to have a shaila. It sounds like from Taisus that's not called eating. Rabbi Kiveger's Mitzay in the Taisus in Nidan Lamed Beis that has a very similar kashan teretz, but the teretz is slightly different in the sense that the teretz is that it's not considered eating when you're liquefying it, but it's not considered chelev. The product changes. And that kind of machlekes of Taisus and might have ramifications as well. And now let's move beyond the chelev and dam and talk about other isurim. Taninami gabe chometz ki hai gavna. We also learned a brisa legabe chometz on Pesach. The himchau ugemoi. Let's say you liquefy some chometz and you drank it on Pesach. Im chometzu, if that thing is chometz einish karis. And im matzahu, and if it's matzah that you liquefied, ein adam yetze ba yedei chevasa bepesach. Now bishleima im matzahi ein adam yetze ba yedei chevasa bepesach. Why? Because lechem eini amar chamana v'hailav lechem einihu. You have a technical problem. This liquid matzah is not considered the lechem eini that the Torah requires you to have. El im chometzu einish karis. But if you tell me your liquefied chometz is going to be iser karis, achil ksiv bei, the Torah says you got to eat it, and this is not eating. You're drinking your matzah. Amar Reish Lakish, Amar Kra nefesh l'rabis is hashaisa. Same gzeres hakosah to be marbed. And now a third halacha. V'tanya nami gabi nivlas oiftar ki ai gavna. Nivlas oiftar that we know is matama bebeis abliya. But the halacha is like the brisa himcho ba'ar tame bechama. If you dissolve it in the sun, it will be tar, and we'll see why soon. Va'avinan ba achiluk siv bei. Why, if you dissolve it, are you actually going to be tame bebeis abliya? Achiluk siv bei, and drinking the liquefied nivlas oiftar is not achila. Amar Reish Lakish also Amar Kra nefesh l'rabis es hashaisa. Now the Gemara asks ihachi bechama nami. So why is bechama going to be tar? To which the Gemara explains bechama is shruchei misrach. If it liquefies in the sun, it is gross, and the nivlas oiftar is only matama tuma bebeis abliya if it's considered an achila and consumable, and if it's so gross, it is not. U'tzrichi. And I need all three of these drushes, which all seem to be the same nefesh drusha, that it's all considered an achila. Because chametz le'asi, meaning I couldn't have learned chametz from chelev, shekein lo'haisla shasa kaisher. Chelev has a chumrah because there was never a time when it was mutter. And nevela le'asi, meaning I couldn't have learned nevela from chelev shekein einish karis. And there's no karis for the nivlas oiftar. Because of rachman chametz, well chelev le'asi, meaning why shekein le'hutter mechlolei. There's no heter for chametz ever, and we'll see soon when there is a heter for chelev. Unevela le'asi, meaning I couldn't have learned nevela from chametz because shekein einish karis. And lastly, because of rachman and nevela, if it only said nevela, and you want to learn the others two from there, hanach le'asi minei shekein metama. There's a unique chumrah that exists by the oif that it itself is a nevela and it itself conveys the tuma, as opposed to the chametz and the chelev that don't. You're right, you couldn't have used one to learn out the other two, but tesi mechad tarti. Let's learn one from two together. Tag team two of them, and let's learn the third. So hi tesi, which one should you leave out and learn from the other two? Le'lichtav rachman and nevela v'tesi minach. Get the drush of nefesh by nevela and learn from chelev and chametz. I'll say mal hanach shekein einish karis, because chelev and chametz both have that unique unique chumrah. And leilichtav rachmana chametz v'tesi v'anach. And if you want to say skip the drush of nefesh by chametz and learn from chaylev and nevela, I'll tell you mal hanach shekain lehoisle shas hakosher. Both chaylev and nevela have a shas hakosher, and chametz is more kal that it had a shas hakosher. And leilichtav rachmana v'chaylev v'tesi v'anach. If you want to say skip the drush of nefesh from chaylev and learn from chametz and nevela, I'll tell you mal hanach shekain lehuter mechlolan. You can't learn chaylev from chametz and nevela because chametz and nevela have the same chumrah that there is no exception and they're always usher. Tamer b'chaylev shuter mechlole. Chaylev has a huter mechlole, so you can't learn this. Umaynihu, and what is this exception that chaylev can become mutter? If you're telling me it's because the chaylev of a behema gets burned on the mizbeach, so that's a huter mechlole. But I'll tell you nevela nami. There's also a huter mechlole by nevela. In what way? Ishtri malikas oif legavaya. This is amazing. When you do malika on a bird, that is a nevela, and you're bringing it on the mizbeach. Incidentally, you see that the Gemara here is calling malika a nevela. As we've spoken about in the past, there's a Yedua Dika Chakir by Al Malika. Is that a shchita for a bird, or is it really not a shchita? It's a heter of a nevela. Here the Gemara is all but saying beferish, this is a heter of a nevela. Both Rabbi Rasner and Rabbi Gross pointed this out when they said their shiurim. V'yela zok the Gemara chaylev chaya lehedyai, which is l'chara the most pashut thing. The chaylev of a chaya is always mutter. But for the Gemara nevela nami ishtri malika dechatas eif l'kehanim. The malika v'chatas eif is mutter to the kehanim. So what is this huter mechlolo of the chaylev? Same for the Gemara. No. Le'olam chaylev dechaya lehedyai. It's the simple understanding of the fact that chaylev chaya is always mutter. The ud kakoshalach kahanim, and this that you're asking that a kayan is allowed to eat the basar oif of the chatas, even though it's technically a nevela. I'll tell you, kahanim mishulchan gavaya kazachu. There's never really a heter, but since they're being zeiche mishulchan gavaya, al yidei dezrikas adam, it's not considered a heter of nevela because at that point it's coming straight from gavaya. So bottom line, we can't leave out the drasha of nefesh from any one of the three and learn from the other two, as there are unique chumras that exist by all the other twos. I Tanya, the Brisa says tameim. By the pasuk by Shrutzim, it says that ha tameim, and we darshan le'asert tziran v'reitban v'kifan v'kipa shalahen, that we're answering all these other parts of the Shrutzim. So lamali, why does the Torah need to answer all these liquids that come out of Shrutzim? Ligmar mehani. Let's learn from the things before, meaning chaylev, chametz, nevela, those three, that the liquid forms of these things are also going to be usher, just like its solid forms. So too, I don't need to have a drasha for ha tameim by Shrutzim. Everything more tzrichi. I need everything because the ilakas of Rachmana, the Torah not said by Shrutzim, and therefore I would have said Mahasam Adika Kazais, just like by Chaylev Chametz and Nevela, you need to have at least a Kazais of that liquid. So Avhachanami Adika Kazais. I might have said also you need to have a Kazais of liquid for the Shrutzim, but it's not true because even if it would be as small as an Adasha, it would still be Matama. It's interesting that we talk about the liquefied thing is a Kazais, not a Revius. But the Achrein of Meir Simcha, the Afikayam, they all discuss this idea of a solid that becomes liquefied still has the properties of the solid, such that we go buster the shiurim of the solid. Turning over to Tamid Beis, Frektig Mar V'Lichtev Rachman B'Shrutzim. Let's learn from Shrutzim that their liquefied form is like their solid form, and therefore V'Leisu Hanach V'Ligmu B'Nayu, and therefore everything else can be learned from Shrutzim. To which the Gemara answers, no, Mishum Di'ikal Mifrach, Mal Shrutzim Shekin Matumas and Mashu, and Mashu is Lavdafka, means as small as this Adasha. So that Chumrah of size by Shrutzim is going to prevent us from learning to the other things that require Shiurim like a Kazais. V'Hodatanya, what about the Brisa that says HaTevel, V'Hachodesh, V'Hahegdish, V'Hashvias, V'Kilayim, all of these kinds of Yisurim, Kulan Mashkan Hayotzim Mehen Kemaisan. The Brisa says that all of the liquids that come out or come from these different things are going to have the same din as them. But Minolan, who says that once they're liquefied, they're also going to have the same properties? From the different halachas we've already said, I'll tell you, they happen automatically. Meaning chaylev, chametz, nevela, you don't do anything to make these things usher. They are be'etzem usher. And it would likewise be the same for most of the other ones, tevel, chodesh, shvias, and kilayim. They are also automatically usher. But as Rashi points out, hegdish is not that way. You have the human input of making these things hegdish. The Taisus Arash argues with Rashi. He says that even it's going to be the kilayim is the one that we're asking from also. But the Gemara fears ice. So therefore I hear it when the isser happens automatically that we can learn from those original halachas of chametz and nevela, etc., etc. But hechet alav isser habame'elav minol, and how are you going to know that a liquefied form of these things are also going to be usher? To which the Gemara says gamrinim and bikurim, where the owner sets those aside, and that's not automatic because you have to do something about it and tie your ribbon around these pairs. And the Torah does tell us that the liquefied form of bikurim is also going to have the same halach as bikurim. Praktik Gemara ubikurim gufahu minol, and how do you know that? Tani Rabbi Yaisi pri. The Torah says you got to bring pairs. Now pri atamevi biatamevi mashka. I might have thought you can't bring a liquid form for bikurim, but hevi anavim udurachan minayin. How do you know if you bring grapes and you squeeze them into wine? How do you know that you'll also be yetzer bikurim? Tambalim tavi. So you see, the liquefied form of bikurim is also going to be considered bikurim. So you can compare that to hegdish, and therefore even liquefied hegdish will have the din of hegdish. There are special chumras that you have by bikurim, all these halachas of the kriya and the hanacha that you put on the mizbeach. Ella zok the Gemara another idea. Gomer mitruma. Truma gufa minol, and how you know the liquefied form of truma is going to have a din of truma? The iskish lebikurim. Damar mar v'trumas yadcha elu bikurim. The Torah calls bikurim truma. So we're making a hekish that just like liquefied bikurim is considered the peri, so too liquefied truma is considered truma. I frak the Gemara mala truma shekain chayavin alea misa v'chaimish. You have the special chumrah by truma. So the Gemara says, okay, ela gomer mitarvayu mitruma ubikurim. Tag team the two of them. But I'll say also mala truma ubikurim shekain chayavin alea misa v'chaimish. Ela asya mitruma v'chad mehanach. You're right. Learn from truma. That'll be the ikar limud plus one of the other ones. Chaylev, chametz, nevela, or shratzim. Oy mi bikurim v'chad mehanach. Or bikurim in one of those. So truma plus one or bikurim plus one. And the Gemara seems to be happy with that. What about the Mishnah in the 11th parak of Trumas that dvash tamar miyayin tapuchin v'chaimitz sisvani yais if a kain eats any of these liquids? Or b'shar me peris shel truma. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev keren v'chaimish. Rabbi Yeshua is paiter. We have a machlekes tanaim here. So by my plagi, what are they arguing about? What is the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? B'dain mina mina ubidun mina v'oku ba'asar kamiflaki. They're arguing about this idea of dain mina mina. When you learn one thing from another thing, does it have to go all the way or not? Rabbi Eliezer savar dain mina umina that mabikurim, which is our source. Mashkin hayetza mehen kemaisan af truma nami mashkin hayetza mehen kemaisan. So the halach will be at truma the same exact way. Umina, and we'll continue to learn from it that mabikurim afilu sharminin, just like by bikurim, has other kinds of peiros beyond just shivas aminim of grapes and olives. Af truma nami afilu sharminin. Also by truma, the halach is that these liquefied peiros are going to be like their original fruits, even by other kinds of fruit. This, of course, has to be worked out with the machlekes Rashi and the Rambam if there is truma deraisa by things other than tirish v'yitzer and by other fruits. Akapanim, Rabbi Eliezer is learning over from bikurim all the way over to truma completely. For Rabbi Yeshua savar daimina, we're going to learn from it that ma bikurim mashkanei tzimim and kamaisan, they have the same halacha, liquids and solids. Af truma mashkanei tzimim and kamaisan v'uki ba'asra, but then leave it in its own context that ma mashkin dekachim betruma, just like the liquids that can be made as truma are limited, meaning because tirish v'yitzer in midi achrina loy, it's only wine and oil that you can make into kachim. Af mashkin hayetzim menu kamaisan, also the liquids that come out of truma are going to have those same halachas that tirish v'yitzer in midi achrina loy. One more. This is says in the Mishnah, bikurim mashke, you can't bring bikurim as a liquefied form. Ella hayetzim min azesim min anavim. It dafka has to be from olives and grapes. Money, who's that going to be like? It's Rabbi Yeshua. The Omer doin minei v'uki ba'asra. That when the Torah puts together the truma bikurim, it's only going to be as far as oil and wine. V'gomer lahu lebikurim mitruma, and therefore he learns bikurim from truma. The only liquefied bikurim is going to be some zesim and anavim. Okay, we're going to stop here and pick it up with this next V'hodet Tanan for tomorrow's daf.